The sound of fabric tearing was loud enough that the entire reception went silent. My name is Nora Blake, and I'm standing in the middle of my sister's wedding reception with my dress ripped from shoulder to waist, my bra exposed, while 150 guests stare at me in shock. The woman who ripped it is my sister's maid of honor, Claudia Whitmore. She's standing there with a piece of my dress still in her hand, a satisfied smirk on her face. Let me explain how we got here, because this story started 6 months ago when my sister Penelope announced her engagement. Penelope is 5 years older than me, always has been the golden child, the successful one, the daughter my parents brag about at dinner parties. She's a corporate attorney making 6 figures, drives a BMW, lives in a downtown condo with floor-to-ceiling windows. I'm a veterinary technician who works at an animal shelter, drives a 10-year-old Honda, and lives in a small house with my husband Cameron. Cameron is a Navy SEAL. Has been for 8 years. He's gone more than he's home, deployed to places he can't tell me about, doing things he can't talk about. When we got married 4 years ago, my parents weren't thrilled. They thought I was limiting my potential, tying myself to a military salary and a husband who'd never be around. They wanted me to marry someone like Penelope's fiancé, Graham. Graham is a hedge fund manager, comes from old money, went to Yale, has connections that open doors. He's exactly the kind of son-in-law that makes my parents feel successful. When Penelope got engaged, she asked me to be a bridesmaid. Not the maid of honor, that position went to Claudia, her college roommate and fellow attorney. But I was still in the wedding party, still expected to participate in all the pre-wedding events. That's where the problems started. The bridal shower was at a country club I couldn't afford. The bachelorette party was in Miami, flights and hotel for 3 nights. The bridesmaid dress cost $400 plus alterations. Then there were the shoes, the jewelry, the hair and makeup for the wedding day. I did the math. Being in Penelope's wedding was going to cost me close to $3,000. Cameron and I had been saving for a down payment on a better house. That $3,000 was a chunk of our savings, but I didn't say anything because I didn't want to cause problems with my sister. At the bridal shower, Claudia made a comment about my gift. I'd gotten Penelope a nice set of kitchen utensils from her registry, about $150 worth. Claudia had gotten her a Le Creuset Dutch oven that cost $400. Claudia said loudly in front of all the guests, "Oh Nora, that's such a practical gift. I guess when you're on a budget, you have to be creative." Everyone got quiet. My mother looked embarrassed. Penelope looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. I smiled and said, "I figured Penelope would actually use these. Practical works." But the damage was done. The rest of the shower, people kept making subtle comments about military salaries and making sacrifices and living within your means. The bachelorette party in Miami was worse. Claudia had planned the whole thing, booked a suite at a luxury hotel, made reservations at restaurants where entrees started at $80. She told everyone it would be about $1,200 per person for the weekend. I'd already stretched our budget to be there. When we got to dinner the first night and I saw the prices, I ordered carefully, chose the least expensive entree, skipped cocktails. Claudia noticed. She said, "Nora, are you on a diet? You're barely eating." I said, "Just not that hungry." She said, "Or maybe you can't afford to eat here." I should have checked before I made reservations. I forgot not everyone can keep up. The other bridesmaids laughed nervously. Penelope said, "Claudia, come on." But Claudia continued, "No, seriously, if money is tight, Nora, you should have said something. We could have planned something more budget-friendly. Like Olive Garden or something." I said, "The restaurant is fine." She said, "Is your husband still deployed? Must be hard being married to someone who's never around. Practically a single woman." That crossed the line. I said, "Cameron is serving our country. He's exactly where he needs to be." She said, "Sure, but let's be honest. Penelope is marrying a man who'll be around to actually build a life with her. You're married to a man who's always gone, making barely enough money to get by. There's a difference." I stood up and left the table. went back to the hotel, cried in my room, considered flying home early. Penelope came to my room later and apologized for Claudia. Said she was just drunk, didn't mean it, was stressed about the wedding. I said, she's been making comments like this since the shower. About my money, about Cameron, about our life. Penelope said, I'll talk to her. Please don't leave. You're my sister. I want you here. So I stayed. For the rest of the weekend, I avoided Claudia as much as possible, smiled through the events, and counted down until I could go home. Cameron called me while I was in Miami. He was between missions, had limited time to talk. I told him about Claudia's comments. He said, Do you want me to come to the wedding? Cameron had been planning to skip it. He'd be back from deployment the day before the wedding, would be exhausted, and frankly we couldn't afford for him to take time off. Plus, my family had never made him feel particularly welcome. I said, You don't have to. I know you'll be tired. He said, If someone's disrespecting you, I want to be there. I said, It's fine. It's just one more day, and then the wedding will be over. He said, Nora, I mean it. I can be there if you need me. I told him it was fine, that I could handle it. That was my first mistake. The wedding day started at 6 a.m. Hair and makeup, getting dressed, photos before the ceremony. The bridesmaid dress was a pale pink satin, elegant but not particularly flattering. It fit fine, nothing special, but it cost $400, so I wore it without complaint. Claudia looked perfect in her maid of honor dress. Same style as ours but in a slightly darker shade. She'd spent the morning making subtle digs at everyone, critiquing the makeup artist, complaining about the flowers, commenting that her dress fit better than the rest of ours. The ceremony went smoothly. Penelope looked beautiful, Graham looked proud, my parents cried happy tears. I stood at the altar with the other bridesmaids, smiled for photos, pretended everything was fine. The reception was at a country club. Elegant setup with string lights and flowers everywhere. Cocktail hour, then dinner, then dancing. I sat at the bridesmaid table, made small talk, drank one glass of wine because that's all I could afford from the cash bar. After dinner, Claudia gave her maid of honor speech. It was long, full of inside jokes and stories that painted her and Penelope as best friends who'd conquered the world together. She barely mentioned Graham, made no mention of any other bridesmaids, including me. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. She said, Penelope, you deserve this happiness. You worked hard, chose wisely, and found a man who can give you the life you've always wanted. Not everyone makes good choices in relationships, but you did. That's what makes you special. She looked directly at me when she said it. The implication was clear. Penelope made good choices. I didn't. After the speech, I went to the bathroom to compose myself. When I came out, Claudia was waiting in the hallway. She said, Did you like my speech? I said, It was nice. She said, I meant what I said, you know, about making good choices. Some people settle, marry the first person who pays attention to them, end up stuck in mediocre lives. But not Penelope. She aimed high. I said, What's your problem with me? What did I ever do to you? She said, You're a reminder of what happens when you don't live up to your potential. Penelope talks about you sometimes, about how smart you were in school, how you could have done anything. And you chose to work at an animal shelter and marry a soldier who's never home. It's pathetic. I said, Cameron is a Navy SEAL. He's one of the most dedicated, brave people I've ever met. And my job matters. I help animals who have no one else. She said, Keep telling yourself that while your sister builds an actual impressive life. She started to walk away, and something in me snapped. I said, At least I married someone I love, not someone who looks good on paper. She turned around, face red. She said, What did you say? I said, You're jealous. You're 35, single, and jealous that Penelope found someone. So you're taking it out on me because I'm an easy target. She walked toward me fast, got in my face. She said, You have no idea what you're talking about. I said, Then why have you spent 6 months making my life miserable? Why do you care so much about my choices? She grabbed the strap of my dress. She said, because you don't deserve to be here. You don't belong in this family, in this wedding, in this world. You're just the embarrassing little sister who couldn't do better. Then she yanked the strap hard. The dress was satin, delicate, expensive but not well constructed. The strap tore, then the entire shoulder seam ripped, and suddenly the top of my dress was torn from shoulder to waist, hanging open, exposing my bra and skin. We were standing in the hallway outside the ballroom. The door was open. People could see us. The music stopped. Conversations stopped. Everyone turned to look. Claudia was holding the torn piece of my dress, looking shocked at what she'd done. I stood there frozen, trying to hold the dress up, humiliated. My mother rushed over, looking horrified. Not at Claudia for ripping my dress, but at me for causing a scene. She said, "Nora, go to the bathroom. Fix yourself. You're making a spectacle." Penelope came over, looking upset but not at Claudia. At me for disrupting her reception. She said, "What happened?" Claudia said, "It was an accident. The dress just tore. These cheap materials, you know." She was lying and everyone knew it, but no one said anything. Graham's mother said loudly, "Well, this is embarrassing." Other guests whispered. Someone laughed. I stood there holding my torn dress, tears starting to form, feeling like I wanted to disappear. Then I heard a voice from the entrance of the ballroom. "Nora, turn." Cameron was standing in the doorway. He was in his dress uniform, white for summer, medals on his chest, cover in his hand. He looked every inch the Navy SEAL he was, tall and imposing and unmistakable. He'd come. He walked toward me through the crowd, and people moved aside automatically. There's something about a man in military uniform that commands respect, especially someone who carries themselves the way Cameron does. He reached me and immediately took off his uniform jacket and put it around my shoulders, covering the torn dress. He said quietly, "Are you okay?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He turned to Claudia. He said, "Did you do this?" His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. Claudia said, "It was an accident. The dress just." Cameron said, "I asked if you did this. Yes or no?" The ballroom was completely silent. Claudia said, "She provoked me." She said. Cameron said, "So yes. You ripped my wife's dress at her sister's wedding." He looked at my sister. "Penelope, I apologize for interrupting your reception, but I need to address this situation. If you're finding this story compelling, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Drop a like to support the channel." Cameron turned to face the room, addressing all the guests. He said, "My name is Lieutenant Cameron Blake. I'm a Navy SEAL with SEAL Team 3. I've been deployed for the past 6 months in a location I can't disclose, doing work I can't discuss. I came back yesterday morning." He paused. "I wasn't planning to attend this wedding. I was exhausted from deployment and frankly my wife told me it was fine, that she could handle things alone. But she called me from Miami a few weeks ago, upset because someone had been making her feel worthless for being married to me." He looked at Claudia. "I'm assuming that was you." Claudia said nothing. Cameron continued, "My wife works at an animal shelter because she has a gift for helping creatures that have been abandoned and abused. She's saved hundreds of animals in the 4 years we've been married. She works long hours for not much money because she believes the work matters." He said, "I serve my country because I believe that matters too. And yes, I'm gone a lot. Yes, military pay isn't impressive compared to hedge fund managers. But I've spent the last 6 months protecting American interests, protecting people like all of you, so you can have weddings at country clubs and argue about dress codes and champagne brands." The room was dead silent. Cameron said, "My wife told me someone at this wedding had been making comments about our life, our choices, our marriage. She told me it was fine, that she could handle it. But I decided to come anyway because I know my wife. She handles things by staying quiet, by taking insults, by trying not to cause problems." He looked at me. But she shouldn't have to handle being physically assaulted and humiliated at her own sister's wedding. He turned to Penelope. I'm sorry your reception is being interrupted. But your maid of honor just ripped my wife's dress off her body in front of 150 people and then lied about it. And none of you did anything. My mother said. Cameron, this is not the time. Cameron said. Ma'am, with respect, this is exactly the time. Because if I hadn't walked in, your daughter would have been standing here humiliated while everyone blamed her for causing a scene. He looked at my father. Sir, I know you and Mrs. Blake wish Nora had married someone different. Someone with more money, more stability, less time away. I understand that. But I love your daughter more than anything in this world. And I've spent 6 months in a war zone counting down the days until I could see her again. He said. And I come back to find out she's been treated like she's worthless because she married me. That's not acceptable. Graham, Penelope's husband, spoke up. Lieutenant Blake, I appreciate your service, but this is our wedding. Perhaps we can discuss this later. Cameron said. You're right. It is your wedding. So let me make this quick. He turned to Claudia. You owe my wife an apology. Real one. Right now. Claudia said. I'm not apologizing for. Cameron said. You grabbed her dress and ripped it off her body in public. That's assault. I can call the police right now if you'd prefer to handle this officially. Claudia's face went white. Cameron pulled out his phone. Your choice. Apologize or I make a phone call. Penelope said. Cameron, please don't ruin my wedding. Cameron said. I'm not ruining anything. Your maid of honor did that when she assaulted your sister. The room was so tense I could barely breathe. Finally, Claudia said. I'm sorry. Was wrong. I shouldn't have done it. Cameron said. Look at her when you say it. Claudia turned to me. I'm sorry, Nora. I was out of line. Cameron said. Thank you. He turned to me. Do you want to stay? I shook my head. I couldn't imagine staying at this reception for another minute. Cameron nodded. He addressed the room one more time. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Congratulations to the bride and groom. Then he took my hand and walked me out of the ballroom. We got to the parking lot and I started crying. Not delicate tears, but big sobbing gasps that I'd been holding in for months. Cameron held me until I could breathe again. He said, I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner. I said, you came. That's what matters. He said, I landed yesterday morning, slept for 4 hours, got up, put on my uniform and drove straight here. I couldn't let you go through that alone. I said, my family is going to be so angry. He said, let them be angry. You didn't do anything wrong. We drove home in silence. I was still wearing his uniform jacket, my torn dress underneath it. When we got to our small house, Cameron helped me out of the dress, got me into comfortable clothes, made me tea. He said, tell me everything. Start from the beginning. So I did. I told him about the bridal shower, the Miami trip, every comment Claudia had made, every subtle insult, every moment I'd felt small and worthless. Cameron listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, why didn't you tell me how bad it was? I said, you were deployed. You had more important things to worry about. He said, nothing is more important than you. Nothing. He said, Nora, I need you to understand something. What I do, the reason I deploy, the reason I put myself in dangerous situations, it's not abstract. It's for you. It's so you can live in a country where you're safe, where you can work a job you love, where you can build a life. He said, but if you're not safe here, in your own family, at your sister's wedding, then I've failed at the one job that actually matters. I said, you didn't fail. You showed up when I needed you. He said, I should have been here from the start. I should have been at that bridal shower, at that trip to Miami. I should have made sure everyone knew that disrespecting you means disrespecting me. The next morning my phone was full of messages. My mother. You embarrassed the entire family. Bringing Cameron to cause a scene was unacceptable. Penelope. I can't believe you let your husband ruin my wedding. This was supposed to be my day. Various relatives. Very inappropriate. That scene was unnecessary. You should have handled it privately. Not one message asked if I was okay. Not one message acknowledged that Claudia had assaulted me. Cameron read the messages over my shoulder. He said, "Do you want to respond?" I said, "I don't know what to say." He said, "Then don't say anything." Not yet. 3 days later my father called. He said he wanted to meet for lunch, just him and me. I agreed, curious what he wanted to say. We met at a diner near his office. He looked uncomfortable, kept adjusting his tie. He said, "Your mother is very upset." I said, "I know." He said, "Penelope is upset. She says you ruined her reception." I said, "Claudia ripped my dress off at a public event. How is that my fault?" He said, "Cameron didn't need to make it into a big dramatic scene. He could have handled it quietly." I said, "He defended me when no one else would. Including you." That landed hard. My father was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're right. I should have said something. When Claudia made those comments at the shower, when she made that toast at the reception, I should have spoken up." I said, "Why didn't you?" He said, "Because it was easier not to. Because I didn't want to cause conflict with Penelope's friends. Because..." He trailed off. I said, "Because you agree with her." He didn't deny it. He said, "When you married Cameron, your mother and I thought you were making a mistake. We thought you could do better. Marry someone with more stability, more earning potential." He said, "We were wrong." That surprised me. He said, "I've watched how Cameron treats you. I've seen how he looks at you like you're the only person in the room. I've seen how hard he works, how dedicated he is, how much he sacrifices." He said, "And I've seen how happy you are. Even with the deployments, even with the financial struggles, you're happy. Penelope isn't. She married a man who looks perfect on paper, but I've seen how he treats her when he thinks no one's watching. Like she's an acquisition, not a partner." I didn't know what to say. My father said, "Cameron showed me something at that reception. He showed me what it looks like when a man truly loves his wife. He stood up for you in front of everyone, risked making people uncomfortable, because your dignity mattered more than keeping the peace." He said, "I should have done that years ago. I should have told Claudia to back off at the shower. I should have said something during that speech. I should have defended my daughter." He said, "I'm sorry I didn't. And I'm sorry I ever made you feel like your marriage was something to be ashamed of." I started crying, and my father, who'd never been particularly emotional, teared up too. He said, "Your mother will come around eventually. Penelope might take longer. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the work you do, the man you married, the life you've built." That conversation changed things. If this story is hitting home for you, go ahead and drop a like and let me know in the comments if you've ever had someone stand up for you when it mattered most. 2 weeks after the wedding, I got a call from Penelope. She said, "We need to talk." We met at a coffee shop. She looked tired, stressed. She said, "I've been thinking about what happened at the reception." Waited. She said, "I was angry at you for how it all went down. The scene, the drama, all the attention shifting away from my wedding." I said, "I didn't want any of that to happen." She said, "I know. I've been watching the video." I said, "What video?" She pulled out her phone and showed me. Someone had recorded the whole thing, from Claudia ripping my dress to Cameron's speech to us leaving. It had been shared in various family group chats. She said, "When I really watched it, I saw something I missed in the moment. I saw Claudia grab your dress and rip it. I saw you standing there trying to hold it together while everyone stared. I saw Mom telling you to fix yourself instead of defending you," she said. "And I saw Cameron walk in and immediately put his jacket around you. I saw him address the entire room, defend your work, defend your marriage, defend you." She was crying now. She said, I was so focused on my perfect wedding that I didn't see my sister being assaulted and humiliated. And when your husband defended you, I got mad at him for ruining my reception instead of being grateful someone finally stood up for you. I said, Penelope. She said, let me finish. I've spent the last 2 weeks thinking about my marriage. About Graham. About what Dad said to me. I said, Dad talked to you? She nodded. He said that watching Cameron defend you made him realize what's missing in my marriage. Graham wasn't even angry on my behalf about the dress incident. He was annoyed about the scene, about his mother being embarrassed, about the disruption to the schedule. She said, I married Graham because he checked all the boxes. Good job, good family, good prospects. But he doesn't love me the way Cameron loves you. He doesn't even see me, not really. I'm just another achievement, another item on his life plan. I didn't know what to say to that. She said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't defend you. I'm sorry I let Claudia treat you that way. I'm sorry I made you feel like your marriage was less than mine just because Cameron doesn't work in finance. She said, your marriage is real. Mine is just impressive on paper. We talked for 2 hours. Really talked, the way we hadn't in years. She told me about problems in her marriage I'd never known about feeling lonely even though Graham was always there, about realizing that money and status don't make you happy. I told her about the challenges of being married to someone who's deployed constantly, about the fear every time Cameron goes on a mission, about the joy when he comes home safely. By the end of the conversation, we'd both cried and laughed and reconnected in a way we hadn't since we were kids. She said, I'm going to talk to Claudia. What she did was wrong, and I should have said something immediately. I said, you don't have to. She said, yes I do. She's been making comments about you for months and I let it slide because she was my friend. But friends don't attack your family. 3 days later, Claudia showed up at my house. Cameron answered the door. He didn't invite her in. He said, what do you want? She said, I need to talk to Nora. Came to the door. Claudia looked different. Less polished, less confident. She said, can we talk? Please. Cameron looked at me. He nodded. He said, I'll be in the kitchen. You need me, just call. Claudia and I sat on the front porch. She said, Penelope and I aren't friends anymore. She told me what I did was unforgivable, that I crossed a line, that she can't have someone in her life who would do that to her sister. I didn't say anything. She said, I'm not here to make excuses. What I did was wrong. Ripping your dress, all the comments over the months, trying to make you feel small. It was all wrong. She said, you were right about what you said before I ripped your dress. I'm jealous. I'm 35, single, watching everyone around me get married and have families. Penelope was my closest friend, and watching her get married made me feel left behind. She said, and you, with your simple life and your husband who's always gone, you seemed like an easy target. Someone I could feel superior to because at least I had my career and my independence. She said, but watching Cameron defend you, seeing how he looks at you, how he put his career and his exhaustion aside to show up for you, I realized something. You have what I want. Not the money or the status, but someone who actually loves you enough to fight for you. She said, I'm sorry. I'm truly, deeply sorry. I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know I recognize how wrong it was. I thought about it for a moment. Then I said, I accept your apology, but I don't forgive you yet. Forgiveness takes time, and you spent months making my life miserable. She nodded. I understand. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. She left, and I sat on the porch for a while thinking about everything that had happened. Cameron came out and sat beside me. He said, you okay? Said, yeah. It's just a lot. He said, she apologized. I said, she did. I think she meant it. He said, do you think you'll forgive her? Said, maybe someday. Not today. He put his arm around me. That's fair. 6 months after the wedding disaster, my life looked different in unexpected ways. Penelope had separated from Graham. She'd moved into her own apartment, was going to therapy, was figuring out who she was outside of her perfect on-paper marriage. We talked regularly, had sister dinners, were rebuilding our relationship. My parents had come around. My father especially had made an effort to connect with Cameron, to understand his work, to treat him with the respect he deserved. My mother was slower, but she was trying. The animal shelter where I worked had gotten a major donation from an unexpected source. A retired Navy admiral who'd heard about the wedding incident through military channels had sent a check for $50,000 with a note, "For a woman who dedicates her life to helping those who can't help themselves." From one military family to another. That donation allowed us to expand our facilities, hire another vet tech, and save more animals. And Cameron had been home for 4 months. His longest stretch between deployments in years. We'd used that time to strengthen our marriage, to talk about the future, to dream about the house we'd eventually buy with the down payment we'd been saving. But the most unexpected change came from a video. Someone had posted the full video of the wedding incident online. Not in a gossipy way, but in a "this is what standing up for your spouse looks like" way. It had gone viral, gotten millions of views, been shared across military spouse groups and relationship forums. Cameron's speech had resonated with people. His quiet, firm defense of our marriage. His willingness to stand up to a room full of people. His clear love and respect for me. All of it struck a chord. We started getting messages from other military spouses, from people in relationships that others didn't understand, from anyone who'd ever felt judged for their choices. Publisher reached out. They wanted me to write a book about military marriage, about building a life with someone who serves, about finding strength in unconventional relationships. I'd never considered myself a writer, but with Cameron's encouragement, I started working on it. Wrote about the deployments, the fear, the loneliness, but also the pride, the purpose, the deep bond that comes from choosing someone despite the challenges. The book sold well. Not bestseller numbers, but enough that it mattered. Enough that military spouses reached out to thank me for putting their experience into words. Enough that I was invited to speak at military family events, to share our story, to encourage others facing similar challenges. 1 year after the wedding disaster, Penelope got remarried. Not to Graham. They'd divorced, quietly and quickly. She married a high school teacher named Marcus who made her laugh, who supported her career without needing to compete with it, who loved her for who she was rather than what she represented. The wedding was small, just family and close friends. No bridesmaids, no maid of honor, no drama. Just 2 people who'd found each other later in life and were grateful for the chance. At the reception, Penelope stood up to make a speech. She said, "A year ago, I got married at a country club with 300 guests and everything perfect. And it was a disaster, not because of the scene everyone remembers, but because I was marrying someone for the wrong reasons." She said, "Today, I'm marrying Marcus in my parents' backyard with 30 people I actually care about. And it's perfect because I'm marrying someone I actually love." She looked at me and Cameron. "My sister taught me what real love looks like. She showed me that it's not about impressing people or checking boxes or having the right credentials. It's about finding someone who shows up for you, who defends you, who sees you." She raised her glass. "To Nora and Cameron for showing me what I was missing." Cameron squeezed my hand under the table. After the wedding, my mother pulled me aside. She said, "I owe you an apology. A real one." "Waited," she said. "When you married Cameron, I thought you were settling. I thought you could do better. I was wrong about everything," she said. "Watching him defend you at Penelope's wedding, seeing how you two support each other, I realized I'd been measuring success all wrong. I'd been so focused on status and money that I forgot what actually matters." She said, "You found a partner who would literally fly back from a war zone to stand beside you. That's not settling. That's winning." I hugged her, and for the first time in years, it felt like my family understood who I was and what I'd chosen. 2 years after the wedding disaster, Cameron was deployed again. 6 months in an undisclosed location, doing work he couldn't talk about. I missed him terribly, but I'd learned over the years how to build a life that continued even when he was gone. The shelter job, the book, speaking engagements, my relationship with Penelope, Sunday dinners with my parents. The day he came home, I went to the base to meet him. He walked toward me in his uniform, exhausted but smiling. He said, "I missed you." I said, "I missed you too." He said, "Anything interesting happen while I was gone?" I said, "Just the usual. Saved some animals, wrote some chapters, had dinner with Penelope and Marcus." He said, "So nothing dramatic?" I said, "No one ripped my clothes off in public, if that's what you're asking." He laughed. "Good. I don't want to have to defend your honor again. Once was enough." I said, "You know what the best part of that whole disaster was?" He said, "What?" I said, "Everyone finally saw what I've always known. That I married the best man I've ever met." He kissed me right there in front of the other families, the other sailors, the whole base. Someone whistled. Someone else clapped. Cameron pulled back and said, "Let's go home." We drove back to our small house, the one we'd been saving to leave, the one that had become home because it was ours. He looked around at the modest living room, the second-hand furniture, the photos on the walls of our life together. He said, "I've been thinking about the house fund." I said, "What about it?" He said, "Maybe we don't need a bigger house. Maybe this is enough." I said, "Cameron, we've been saving for years. You deserve better than this." He said, "I don't need better than this. I need you, and this house is where we've built our life. The deployments, the returns, the quiet mornings and the hard goodbyes. All of it happened here." He said, "Maybe we use that money for something else. Travel or investing or just having as a safety net. But I don't need a bigger house to be happy." I thought about the fancy house Graham had bought Penelope, the one she'd left because it felt empty. I thought about Claudia's expensive condo and her lonely life. I thought about my parents' beautiful home and the years they'd spent chasing status instead of connection. Then I looked around our small house with its worn furniture and cluttered shelves and photos of us. I said, "You're right. This is enough." 'Cause it was. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you for being here. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more stories like this. Drop a like if this resonated with you, and let me know in the comments about a time someone stood up for you when it mattered. 3 years after the wedding disaster, I ran into Claudia at a coffee shop. She looked different. Softer, less polished, more genuine. She saw me and hesitated, clearly unsure whether to approach. I waved her over. She sat down and said, "I wasn't sure if you'd want to talk to me." I said, "It's been 3 years. Life's too short to hold grudges." She said, "I heard about your book, about the speaking engagements. You've built something really meaningful." I said, "Thank you." She said, "I've been in therapy, working through a lot of issues, understanding why I was so cruel to you." I said, "And?" She said, "I was terrified of being alone, terrified of being the one left behind while everyone else moved forward. So I attacked the one person whose life looked less impressive than mine on paper, trying to feel superior." She said, "It didn't work. I just felt worse about myself." She said, "I'm dating someone now. He's a teacher, makes about a quarter of what I make. My friends think I could do better. But he's kind and he loves me, and that's enough." Smiled. "That's all that matters." She said, "I really am sorry. For everything." I said, "I know. I forgive you." We talked for an hour, and by the end I realized something important. Hurt people hurt people. Claudia had been struggling with her own fears and insecurities, and she'd taken them out on me. That didn't excuse what she did, but it helped me understand it. And understanding brought peace. When Cameron came home that night, I told him about running into Claudia. He said, "How do you feel about it?" I said, "Good actually. Forgiving her felt like letting go of weight I'd been carrying." He said, "That's growth." I said, "You know what I realized today?" He said, "What?" I said, "That wedding disaster was the best thing that could have happened to our family. He looked skeptical. How so? I said. It forced everyone to see what really mattered. It showed my parents what real love looks like. It made Penelope realize she was in the wrong marriage. It gave me the confidence to write the book and build something meaningful, I said, and it showed me again that I married exactly the right person. He said, even though I made a scene at your sister's wedding. I said, especially because you made a scene at my sister's wedding. 4 years after the wedding disaster, Cameron retired from the Navy after 12 years of service. It wasn't an easy decision. He loved his work, loved his team, loved serving. But we wanted to start a family, and we both knew that wasn't compatible with constant deployments. He found work as a civilian contractor, training law enforcement in tactical operations. Good pay, normal hours, home every night. The adjustment was hard at first. He missed the intensity, the purpose, the brotherhood of the SEAL teams. But slowly he built a new life. New routines, new meaning, new purpose. And 6 months after he retired, I got pregnant. We painted the second bedroom in our small house, the one we'd been using for storage. Turned it into a nursery with second-hand furniture and handmade decorations. My mother threw me a baby shower. It was small, intimate, nothing like the elaborate affair at the country club years before. Penelope was there, 8 months pregnant herself. She and Marcus were expecting their first child too. My father gave a toast. He said, to my daughters, both of whom found the courage to build lives that made them happy rather than lives that impressed other people. He looked at Cameron. And to the sons-in-law who showed me what it means to truly love someone. The baby came 3 weeks early. A healthy girl with Cameron's eyes and my stubborn chin. We named her Grace because Grace was what had gotten us through everything, the deployments, the wedding disaster, the hard years, all of it. Cameron held her in the hospital and cried. He said, I want to be the kind of father who defends her the way I defended you. I said, you will be. 5 years after the wedding disaster, my family gathered for Thanksgiving at my parents' house. Penelope was there with Marcus and their daughter Emma. My parents relaxed and happy. Cameron and I with baby Grace. During dinner my mother said, remember Penelope's first wedding? That disaster. We all got quiet. Then Penelope started laughing. Oh my God, that was awful. Claudia ripping Nora's dress. Cameron showing up in his uniform like an action hero. The whole thing. My father said, I felt terrible about that for months. I should have said something earlier. Cameron said, it worked out the way it needed to. Penelope said, you know what's crazy? That disaster led to the best things in all our lives. I left Graham, found Marcus, built a real marriage. Mom and Dad figured out what actually matters. Nora wrote a book that helped thousands of people. She raised her glass. To disasters that turn into blessings. We all raised our glasses. And sitting there in my parents' dining room, surrounded by family who'd learned to see past status and money to what really mattered, holding my daughter while my husband held my hand, I realized something profound. That moment when Claudia ripped my dress, when I stood there humiliated and exposed, it felt like the worst moment of my life. But it was actually the beginning of everything good. It was the moment my family woke up. The moment my marriage was publicly validated. The moment I stopped apologizing for my choices. The moment I learned that dignity isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about standing up for yourself even when it's uncomfortable. And the moment Cameron showed me and everyone else what real love looks like. Not polished or impressive or perfect. Just present, fierce, and unshakable. That's the kind of love worth having. That's the kind of love worth defending. And that's the kind of love we built, one day at a time, in our small house with our simple life and our extraordinary partnership. Thanks for sticking with this story to the very end. If it moved you, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and let me know in the comments what the story meant to you. Your engagement helps more people find these stories. See you in the next one.